Zua Matondo. I am from Zimbabwe, and I am currently an MPP student here. I also run an NGO of young Africans who advise African governments called Enhance Africa. And I'm extremely passionate about young people getting involved in politics and decision making. And we have an amazingly dynamic, distinguished panel with us that have flown from all over the world to come and join us, who are the manifestation of our title. And I'm just going to make a brief introduction to everyone, and they're going to have some time to say what they want, just about their story and where they are, just about 2 minutes each. So first on my left is Teboho.
That's right.
He is the Assistant Director in the Parliamentary Governance and Constituency Division in the Gauteng Province Government, and with a focus on health. We have Honorable Nana Dokua. She is an MP in Ghana, and also the Deputy Information Minister. And on the far left, we have Fadzai Mahere from Zimbabwe. Advocate Mahere, as we call her in Zimbabwe.
Call me Fuzzy.
And she is an advocate, of course, a barrister and lecturer at the University of Zimbabwe, and also an independent candidate for the upcoming elections in Zimbabwe as an MP. So if you just give them a round of applause. And what I'm going to do is just allow you a couple of minutes to just tell us a bit about your story and what it is that you do, and maybe why you got into the position you're in, or how you stumbled on it.
Oh, okay. Thanks. So the name is Teboho Chotela. My passion is politics. I was sharing a story with someone last night, actually, at the dinner, Moses. And he was like, why did you get involved into politics? And my answer was like, I think I was in grade 6, watching a TV interview, and there the then President Thabo Mbeki was. And he was just articulating the work that he was doing, particularly around economic development and the African Renaissance. And I saw an African leader with so much confidence, who knew what he was doing. And I said, you know what, this guy, he speaks well, he knows what he's doing. I think I could be this guy. And that's how I got involved. Years later, got into the student movement. I was studying at WITS. And if, like most speakers from South Africa, I'm sure you've begun to hear a narrative around the inequality and dealing with the issues of 24 years down the line. Have we really resolved the challenges of apartheid and the racial issues? And indeed, it's still there. So when I arrived at WITS, it was the issue of, it doesn't matter if you're academically capable. There are structural issues that we have not yet resolved. And that's when I became a member of SASCO, the student movement, got elected as the SRC president there, and a couple of years later, I got elected as the national deputy president, representing students and therefore sitting in some of the subcommittees in government trying to deal with the issue of access to higher education. And our demand, of course, was free education then, which was eventually passed by President Jacob Zuma last year. I then decided that in order to be a good leader, you need to know the technical know-how. It's not enough for you to just have numbers in a conference and be elected. So I then decided that before one is an elected political leader, there must be a good technocrat. And that's why I ended up working for the Gauteng Department of Health. Gauteng is one of our provinces in South Africa. It's basically the economic hub. It's got a population of just under 15 million. In 2015, when we started the fifth administration, we were sitting on 13.2 million. And I was like, let me be a technocrat there.
Thanks. Honorable Dokua.
Hi, I'm honored to be here and grateful for the opportunity. I'm Nana Madukwa Esiama Eji, and Member of Parliament for Ekuapem North. I'm not so sure how many people know Ghana that well, but Ekuapem North is on the mountains and one of the coolest places everywhere you will want to be. And it's a more of a conservative society. So it's very, very surprising that in the end they will opt for, number one, a woman, and number two, a younger woman at that. So getting there was seriously not a walk in the park. It took commitment, it took resilience, it took adventure, it took so much. And it was something I really wanted to do, So no matter what it took, I worked hard for it, and my people believed in me, and I represent them in Parliament today. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Fadzai Mahere. I'm a young Zimbabwean. My interest in politics probably started when I was prosecuting at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. And one of the things that really struck me at that time was the fact that, you know, the interventions around trying to fix accountability issues were often right at the end after a disaster had happened, as opposed to fixing the governance so that more disasters like that don't happen. I was also offended by the fact that at the International Criminal Court, the bulk of the lawyers, the prosecutors, even the defense counsel are not African. They're British, they're European, they're American, and they're looking at Africa, for the most part, as a project, you know, and just looking at, gosh, you know, how can people govern themselves in this way? And, you know, one of the things I said to myself at that time is, I'm sick and tired of being an example of things that don't work. I'm sick and tired of being, you know, a pet project for a system, you know, that obviously, you know, caused some of our problems, but also I don't want to be a victim about it. And then I obviously moved back to Zimbabwe in about 2011. And if you know about Zimbabwe, one thing you'll know is Robert Mugabe, who is, I think, 95 this year and only got deposed last year. 94-year-old president, so age is a very big thing. I remember when, well, last year, the year before, looking at Zimbabwe and just thinking, you know, gosh, this country has declined so significantly in the esteem of the international community, in the esteem of other Africans, and also just our daily lives have become very, very difficult. The infrastructure, the lack of productivity, you know, just the malaise. And I was like, of course, we can whine about it, we can complain. Very disappointed in the politics on both sides, and I decided, you know, no point in complaining, they're not going to listen, may as well throw your hat in there and be an exemplar of what you think the political culture should look like. And also try and be a bit naive and purist about what politics should be. And instead of it being constantly called a dirty game, try and show how it can inspire hope and a thirst for change, and how transparency can be part of the game, and how people's daily issues and struggles can be in the mainstream of the conversation.
Thank you. It seems to me that a very popular thread amongst young people when they either are beginning to be activists or want to become politically involved is this notion of being discontent. And could we spend a bit of time just exploring that, you know, concept of young people as disruptors? You know, we hear a lot of our liberation struggle heroes. When they started, they were in universities. You know, a lot of the newer trade union leaders, again, started in student unions and movements. Could we just explore a bit more on what it means for a young person to be a disruptor, to be a true disruptor, and how, for example, those amongst us who want to do that first can start doing that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm thinking about it in our sense. And I'll use South Africa as a context because that's the context that I know. You've got a situation where, you know, post-1994, to a large extent, young people, and I remember growing up, you would be told that we're all equal now. We've finally gotten our breakthrough. So there's no fundamental difference between gender. There's no fundamental difference between black, colors. If both of us are in the same school, in primary school, both of us should equally do well. And then all of a sudden you arrive in university, right? And you realize that we have not dealt with the structural issues. We've not systematically said, what is it that makes a Tebogo Totela not perform as well as a Kevin Smith? And there are some fundamentals. So I used to deal in the exclusion committees in university. And I had one lady who was studying towards chemistry. She used to take a train from Davidton. Davidton's probably like a 2-hour train drive. She must take a train, arrive on campus. She must be expected to perform well in class. They've got practicals that they do that end at 6. At 6, she must then take a train and go back in this train and still be able to work home. And that was sort of the issues that we're saying that, yes, we've done a breakthrough, but we have not dealt with the systematic issues which continue to perpetuate a particular challenge, be it gender, be it race. And if you saw the Fees Must Fall movement in 2015, it was exactly that. It was to say that it is not enough to say that we're giving out bursaries. If you don't deal with the holistic problem that is faced in higher education, you're not going to be able to do that. And that is part of the problem sometimes, because as young people, there's a saying that goes, if you are young and you're not radical, it means you're heartless. But if you're old and not conservative, it means you're not wise. So to a large extent, it's an appreciation of those tensions that inherently will exist between those who are older than us and those who are young. And there are necessary tensions that allow us to move the old to understand the challenges that we face, but also to appreciate the wisdom that comes with age.
Well, but per your question, I just remembered one very popular quote that I like to read a lot. It reminds me of so much. By this lady called Maureen Sedonen, who said, "Youth involvement has moved forward. It's no longer seen as a rebellious act the way it was seen a few decades ago." If I can give you a little background, in Ghana, Ghana is generally a conservative country, and our conservative nature has had an influence on the youth, and our sociocultural practices as well has also had an influence on the youth in their ability and their confidence to even take up certain key leadership positions. So talking about our original governing system, which was a traditional political system, we also call it the chieftaincy institution, of which who is able to be the leader depended on which family you were born into. So automatically that crosses out about 90% of everybody else in the community. It was not an open system where we could all apply depending on your ability or your capability or your experience or your background. That didn't matter. All that mattered was which family you were born into. And even depending on the family you were born into, you also had to come from a particular bloodline to be able to rule, to be able to lead. And it was on very rare occasions that a youthful person will be nominated to be installed as the chief or a king of the community. And on such rare occasions where the nominated king or chief is a youth, he was given an advisory body full of the elderly. And the elderly advisory body had to sanction and endorse every decision or every action that the king could take. And up until now, we all here probably used to associate maturity directly with age, as well as gray hair with age, and in a nutshell, wisdom with age. And now, thankfully, things have changed, although very gradual, but there still is a dynamic change. And the onus lies on us to continue pressing to see the change that we need to see. Back then in Ghana, before the influx of formal education, the male youth were farmers or fishermen predominantly, depending on which geographical location they were. And the female youth were confined to the kitchen and then homemaking. Premium was placed on the physical strength of the youth than the intellectual capabilities of the youth. And our intellectual capabilities were not explored at all. For instance, if a hunter went into the forest and then came back with a wild beast, the hunter was seen as a very strong man. But it takes skill, it takes strategy to be able to overcome that beast. And all those were intellectual work. But the emphasis was placed more on the physical abilities of the hunter as against his intellectual skill. So back then, everything was about how strong the youth is, and not how smart the youth is, not how alert the youth is. It's unfortunate, but it's hard to accept, but we can't compare the youth of today to the youth of yesterday. Information available to the youth of today at the age that it's available to us now was not available to the youth of yesterday at the same age. Our premium has increased. So much is entrusted to us now. We grew up with mothers who were career women, and the youth of yesterday grew up with mothers who were babysitting them till they were adults. So we have been forced to mature faster than they were forced to mature. Thank you.
Thank you. Fuzzy, I know you angered a lot of elder people as you started disrupting Zimbabwe.
So I think, I mean, your question, Zuba, raises two issues, the issue of discontent and the issue of liberation. And I think in Zimbabwe, like most African countries, African jurisdictions, you had this problem where the liberators felt that their bounty or their reward for fighting the war was political power, such that it's a very exclusionary system. And because the war, for example, in Zimbabwe was almost 40 years ago, young people just have no space. If you're born in 1985, that's 5 years after independence. So there's no space for you. This issue is compounded by the fact that generally, being young, vocal, and telling the truth to old people is countercultural, especially when they're wrong. It's okay if it's praise, but if they're wrong, and they're oppressing you, and they're corrupt, and they're manipulating the law to their own selfish ends, they're going to have a big problem with that. And they start calling you names, they jail you, they arrest you, all sorts of problems. And they tell you, quite frankly, it's not your role to lead, young people will lead tomorrow. And you know what they say about tomorrow? Tomorrow never comes. So discontent for young people seeking elected office, for me is a good thing. Only that, it needs to be channeled. We have to be very clear that being young in and of itself is not a qualifier for doing well. Mugabe, when he started, was amazing. He was young. A lot of these people were really young when they started out with all these good motives. So being young alone isn't the answer. We need to complicate the conversation a bit more and say, okay, how are we going to build on to the legacy of liberation? How are we going to take our nations forward? What is the vision? Where are we going? Such that we're not stuck and hung on identity politics too much, but we actually are starting to make our nations progress. We are stakeholders for the future. The more things decline in Africa and in our respective countries, the more we are likely to lose out. And as people who've got an interest in a future that's successful, as young people, we need to do more to ensure that we invest so that even if we don't reap those rewards directly, the next generation can have a better shot at life in Zimbabwe than we did, life in Africa than some of us did.
I think that you raised something very key at the end, which is something I've encountered a lot when I've traveled around Africa. And I meet a lot of young people, and we're very passionate as young people, especially when we're out of the fore. And then I fear sometimes that there's this very large possibility of becoming co-opted, when we decide to either join bureaucracy, when we run for office, and then finally when we are in office. So what can you say to young people to inspire them? What has been your experiences in making sure you don't lose that fervor? Because we're there to challenge, we're there to change, we're there to reform, and there to make sure that the future generations are not going to encounter the issues we had from our past generations.
Thank you very much, sir. I'll start by saying that when we say young people should be involved in politics and in governance, we're not talking about, just ticking boxes, just having quotas filled up. We're talking about genuine agency, where they've got their own voices that are autonomous from the powers that be, that are autonomous from the establishment, that are authentic and can actually drive some original thought, channel the naivety that young people have, and use that to build the sort of societies that we can be proud of. We don't want to just be recruited so that a government or a political party or a system can say, we've got young people, and yet we don't have our voice. Before you open your mouth in Parliament, you have to look to the Chief Whip and say, is it okay for me to raise that? That's not having young people in politics. That's being pawns of the system and perpetuating it. And so I think it's very important for us to be careful. And it is going to come at a cost. Make no mistake, when you come and you want to disrupt and you want to make changes and you want to drive change and speak to the issues in a compelling way, you know, they're not going to smile at you and say, yeah, of course, come through. That's never going to happen. You're going to have to fight. You're going to have to grind. Thankfully, fingers crossed, you're not going to have to fight a war for it. But you will face, you know, a number of hurdles, and we need to keep going, and we need to make sure we've got the grit and the mettle and not, you know, say as young people, not be weak about it, not be victims about it either, but just genuinely say, how do we penetrate? How do we, you know, knock that ceiling out? And how do we actually push the country forward? Because I think we can all agree that our interest is to take the project forward. You know, we don't want inclusion or political participation for its own sake. We genuinely have a heart and conviction, you know, to see things do well and progress. And so our value system also has to be strong and a level up from what we've seen in previous generations.
Can I just add on to the point? And I completely agree. You see, part of the problem, and I'll say this because I really take much respect to you because you've taken the independent route. I've decided to take the party political route, which is the African National Congress. And what we perpetually fight with, and that's why it's so important to stick to your principle, because history will vindicate you. In 2011, Julius Malema was still president of the ANC Youth League. We went to a conference and we were adamant about certain policy positions that we wanted to agitate because the old guard was comfortable and were raising issues such as land redistribution, the issues of inequality. The then leadership was so dismayed by the issues that we were raising as the ANC Youth League that they expelled him. He didn't walk out. They expelled him out of the movement and they said, it's never going to work. You're not going to get this free education. It just doesn't make sense to us. Go. Julius begged and said, you can take everything, please don't take my membership. Just don't take my membership, allow me to continue participating. They expelled him. 4 years down the line, the Economic Freedom Fighters, which is Julius Malema's party, is the third biggest party. The policies that we've just gone to adopt in our conference right now, in what year was it last year? 2017, are a mirror of what we're saying as the youth in 2011. So, history will vindicate you, and it's so important because I face it all the time, where it is so easy to become a lapdog of the big political leaders, who through their patronage network, because you are this young person, you've got needs that you must do, you have to pay for fees, you have to do all of these things, they come and they say they want to assist you, but once they have got you under the grip, you become their mouthpiece. And it's that difficulty that as young people in politics you need to sort of be able to say, how do I create myself into an asset that I'm not a tool that will be used? What is my asset? So that when I come to the table, I'm not begging for crumbs, but I'm saying, this is what I'm bringing to the table. You either take it or you don't, because this is my principle. And it's not an easy thing to do, by the way. And history has shown that. So I really want to emphasize the issue of sticking to your principle. And it will not be easy, but history tends to vindicate those that stick with it.
Can I push you a bit on that? Why did you not leave when Julius was expelled? You know, what made you confident that you could, within this ANC party structure and culture,
so let me tell
institute that change?
So they expelled Julius. I remember it was in January, and I was watching the press conference, and my heart was painful. And we're going to the national conference in 2012, which is the highest decision-making body of our party, and it has got the power to overturn those decisions. So we were all around the country with Julius, pushing some of these campaigns to say how, please, branches, let's go and do that. Let's try to bring him back in conference. And of course, conference decided against it, and they therefore expelled him. I stayed because I believed in what the founding fathers of our parties were pushing. And I had always said to myself that I will stay in this party for as long as I believe it is able to achieve the objectives that it does. And I'll be honest, the last 9 years have been very difficult under the previous leadership that we've been. There were times when I sat there and I said, do I really want to be associated with some of these things that I fundamentally differ with. And what I then said to myself is that I won't go with the chorus. So when we had the Nkandla scandal of the houses of the, I was like, I'm not going to sit in a panel and say that that house that was built with taxpayers' money is correct. You must speak out and agitate. And I'm glad that 5 years down the line, we went to a conference that has really, you know that we've just come from a conference, has cleaned out some of those elements, because the ANC doesn't belong to its leaders. When it was founded by the people of South Africa that said, this is a vehicle to liberate us as black people. So when leaders begin to think that they themselves have become this ANC and vulgarize what belongs to society, it's when we must stand up. So I've believed in this vehicle that people believed in. And we must safeguard it, because it's not ours. It's not any leader at that particular time. But when you can no longer fix it, you must also be open to the fact that you must be able to move away. And it's not a door that one is closed, but it's one that says that fight for this thing that belongs to the people up until you can't fight anymore.
Honorable Doko, I know you've now been in office for some time. How has it been as a young person, you know, being in the system? And you're not just an MP, you're a deputy minister as well. Have you felt resistance towards new ideas, a new approach of doing things? Or have you found yourself sometimes, you know, picking certain battles to fight and leaving others? How can you advise young people when they get in those situations?
Thank you. Well, this is my first term in Parliament. I'm in my second year. And in my first year, yes, I did get nominated, and then my nomination was approved by Parliament. Merging the two positions hasn't been so easy, but it's been workable. And as an MP, my complete interest is in my constituents. And seriously, I'm not ready to compromise anything that will affect my constituents in any way or form. So I hold their interests up high, and I work towards executing everything that we have discussed as part of my mandate and the reason why they gave me the overwhelming support. Well, for now, there hasn't been a bit where I have to hold back anything that I need to fight for because of my political party. There hasn't been any such situation yet. But should there be, I still hold my constituents and their interest higher. It's because of them that they are the ones I represent, and it's because of them that I'm there, and I'm supposed to be working in their interest and no other interest.
And Fadzi, you went the independent route. Could you explain to everyone why you chose to do that, and especially as a young candidate when you don't necessarily have the apparatus of...
It's probably faster.
Is that?
But you don't have the apparatus of party, you know, grassroots organization and other mega structures. So what made you choose that independent route?
Okay, so the first thing is that, you know, I became politically active, and by that I mean actually engaged, maybe 2 years ago. That's very recent. And as Teboho, Italian political parties, longevity and having been there a long time is rewarded. So they don't generally look at a fresh face and say, you know, come in. That's the first thing. But more fundamentally than that is that I, together with the team, are very purist about our ideals. We'd spent about a year in activism, you know, speaking truth to power and urging political parties to make certain changes in as far as how they engage with their constituents and the people, and they kept telling us it can't be done. We said, look, get more communities involved, get more community mobilization. They said it couldn't be done. They said, let's have more volunteers in politics. Let's knock on doors, let's engage with people, let's talk to them about their issues. They said it can't be done. We said, look, let's make the daily issues mainstream so that when we open the newspaper every day, it's not, you know, party leaders jostling for positions. It's the bread and butter issues. It's questions around the economy, around agricultural productivity, around, you know, the monetary crisis. They said it can't be done. So the reason we went in as a campaign is to show people that, look, it can be done. You can use tech to disseminate information. You can have a good relationship with the public. You can go back to the grassroots and mobilize. So we had, this naivety around how politics should happen, getting people engaged around their constitutional rights. And because it's so much harder to tell the establishment, do this, it's easier to do it and then now show how it can be done. Now you've got all these parties calling for volunteers, all of them starting grassroots projects, all of them using taglines. But they told us just a year or two ago that it could not be done. So I wanted to be a disruptor in the genuine sense of the word and to have agency and authenticity around what I was doing. I didn't want to be tied to a political party position. I want to be married to principle. And sometimes being in a political party on either side, principle is sacrificed. That the value system is sacrificed. The importance of people's issues. And you see this in Parliament every single day. It's never about what's right. It's not about genuine law reform. It's about taking the party position and towing the line. Something that I hate the most about political party politics. And so independence, I liked it because it gave me independence. And because I'm so vocal, I just would not have been able to survive in a system where I'm constantly told, do this, say this, don't say this, don't do this. It compromises you. And as a lawyer, I've got an interest in preserving my ethical position, preserving my corporate image, and that means staying true to values and not being involved in a political system or in politics that are dirty, so to speak. Transparency, all those things are very important because we handle the public funds. And one thing I can say to all young people aspiring is that once people believe in your ideal, once you're able to persuade people that what you stand for is X, and it's progressive, and it's compelling, people will throw their money behind you. The grassroots will come behind you because all they're looking for is politicians that won't lie to them and politicians that are sincere. And unfortunately, you don't always get that in political parties. And so once you've got all that, and this word was always thrown around, structures, you don't need to be in a political party to have strong organizational capacity. You can absolutely do that. So it's about disrupting the system and saying, look, what we want at the end of the day is true representation and progress. And do you need a political party to do that? I say no.
And we have, I think we're very privileged to have, of the three panelists, two amazing, strong, intelligent women. And I think it would be, it would be a miss for us not to ask for some advice, specifically for young women who want to be involved in politics. What are the red flags? What are the challenges? And of course, some could even argue what may be certain things you could use to your advantage. If any.
Okay.
So that would be great to hear.
Do you want to go first? No.
Well, just as I said in my brief intro, I come from a very conservative community, and that's the community that I represent. Well, to be a woman in politics in Ghana is not so easy. It's a very rough road. You are associated with all the immoralities everyone can think of. It is okay if a man is in there, but if it is a woman, you are immoral. When a man is not able to deliver anything, they are able to attribute it to lack of logistics. But when a woman hasn't been able to deliver anything, it is attributed to the fact that she is a woman. Irrespective of her education, irrespective of her background, irrespective of her experience, irrespective of her networks. It is all because she is a woman. Well, not to sound too feminist, but
there's nothing wrong with that.
Like, make no apology. Nothing wrong. Yeah. There was a time in Ghana where the government then started this campaign, send your girl child to school, because there was some part of Ghana that although there was an influx in formal education, the girl child was still confined to the kitchen. Now, after this campaign of send your girl child to school, the girl child was going to school and then the male child was withdrawn because of that girl child campaign. So I'm very careful of talking too much about women getting into politics. By saying women should get into leadership position, we are not saying the men should be withdrawn. But if, for a country like Ghana, we have 52% of our population being women, yet we have barely 12% of our parliamentarians, people's representatives, being women, then we are inadequately represented. We should be doing a lot better. But our men are ready to fight us. If you're a woman here and you intend getting into politics, I hope you do not in any way assume that once you are beautiful, you're going to go scot-free. Or once you look innocent, you're going to go scot-free. It doesn't matter which home you were raised. It doesn't matter what you know and what you do not know. Once you gear up to get into politics, you should be ready to be maligned. You should be ready to be pushed over. You should be ready to be insulted. You should be ready for everything. But once you know that this is what you want to do, you want to be part of the change. You want to be part of the system. You want to be able to influence somebody else. I'm not so sure it's okay to allow the little insults and the pushovers and all the discouragements affect you in any way or form. Just psych yourself that it's going to happen anyways. And when it happens, yes, there are times when you have to step out strong. You get inside and you shed a tear or two. It's fine. Everybody does it. The next day, you step out stronger. There are times when you get to your community and, well, your opponents, especially the men, do it a lot more, will probably set up people to say things against you. Yes, it's fine. It happens. But as they do it, the least you'd want your opponent to see is how bad whatever he did has affected you. It's not going to be a walk in a park. Till now, there's no affirmative action in Ghana to ensure more women into parliament. But it's fine. As much as it's changing gradually. And some of us are going to make sure that the change is faster than it's already going. Thank you.
On this issue, I'd like to say that, as you can imagine, being an African political landscape, there are obvious structural barriers, numerous ones. And, you know, what I've said to myself is that I choose not to be a victim about it. At the same time, be alive to it, especially for people that are coming behind you. I recall when we launched our manifesto, we spent so much time on it. You know, we went into the community, did an outreach program, pre-manifesto, thought out all these projects, you know, reached out to our disability advisor, our legal advisors, our public health advisors. We put lots of work into making it a very solid technical document. And I remember the day when we put it out, when we launched it, we used a bot and, you know, we thought about it so hard. And the first comments I got on Twitter, on Facebook were, "Fadzi, are you married?"
I know.
And I was like, goodness gracious me, this yellow manifesto is amazing, okay? How dare you make it about my identity? So these things happen. You have to roll with the punches. But once you get into a position of power and influence, you have to be the first person to champion and influence those rights. And that's a model I take from my corporate experience as a practicing lawyer, which in Zimbabwe, especially at the bar, is a male-dominated environment. I've learned very quickly that, you know, there are structural problems. Help as many women as you can come up to join you, because men pull each other all the time. Young men come here, they go to the bar, they go to the club, they pull each other up. Women don't really have the same spaces. So you try, and as far as you can, to help other women. And also when it's strategic, to use our voices, just given the context, to speak out quite powerfully around some of the issues that women face, to ensure that it's a safer space. And also, what I've noticed, just like in law, is that once people see that you're competent, once people see that you could be a good representative, they do often get past the fact that you happen to be a woman, because at the end of the day, all we want is progress. And that change is sometimes slow coming, but we have to be patient and do whatever we can to catalyze the process.
If I can add, it's very easy for a man to be vying for a particular position and other men may not be in support of him. It's very easy. It happens all the time. But if a woman is vying for a particular position and the other women don't support her, then we say women are their own enemies. How did that happen? Men don't support men any day, but men are not their own enemies. But when a woman is not supporting a woman, it means a woman is the enemy of another woman. These are some of the things said that has actually influenced us as women for some time now. And thinking through it, I think we should be able to push it off. And as women, build networks and then support each other. Supporting each other means supporting potential, not just because she's a woman. We don't want women who are spoon-fed. We want women who are ready to go through the competition and then win enormously.
I think, I think that's an excellent point as we transition to our Q&A, something to be reminded of. Teboho touched it a little bit at the beginning of the panel, and you've just made it clear again that just because we're young or just because we're women doesn't entitle us to positions.
But it shouldn't be a basis upon which we're excluded. So obviously we shouldn't be given anything because we're women or because we're young, but they can't look at us and say, you're a woman, you're young, don't come in. They must look at the content of your character, the sincerity of your motive and your plan for progress in deciding whether or not to vote.
It's excellence and capability and capacity that's really going to push us forward.
So I just differ a little bit because I never understand why we always create a new definition when we consider, so for example, when we must elect women leaders, we have to go and debate their capability. Or when you must elect a black leader, they're assumed not to be capable. I detest it. I detest it so much. And I know it because when we went to conference, the first ever lady in the ANC to stand up, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, was vilified as just an ex-wife. And it was, here is this woman who is a politician in her own right. In actual fact, she was in the national cabinet before the ex-husband was even in national cabinet. And she was reduced to Jacob Zuma's ex-wife. And it infuriated me in the manner that she was vilified going to that campaign. I think how we do it, we can't look. As a male, I know that I'm privileged. I know that as I enter into this room, I've got male privilege and it's inherent, right? So you can't hold on my good deed that I will give up this privilege. We must deal with it by legislating it. We can't be apologetic about legislating affirmative action. We cannot. Because as we sit there, I'm going to stand there as a male and say, no, actually, this woman is not like this, she's not like that, they're not capable. No. We pushed it in our party. We've got a 50-50 percentage in the top leadership structure. And even when we go and we do public representatives, we are forced. Because if you don't legislate it and wait for my goodwill as a man, we'll never have females leading. So I felt like I need to say that.
Thank you so much for that. We're going to open the floor up for some questions, not comments, but questions. So... Oh my goodness gracious! Who's the youngest one? Okay, I saw hands shoot up right away on that end. Okay, so can you debate amongst you who asked the question?
This is one long question.
One long question? Oh Lord. Any, mini, miny, mo. They're all women. It's okay.
Popcorn, yeah.
Pop.
So my question is, are we accepting the political culture that makes women shrink themselves, that doesn't accept feminism as something that is inherently part of party politics, as a part of political institutions? I think that feminism is often operating at the periphery because even if women are in these political institutions, they're not pushing feminist agendas. They're not pushing kind of feminist principles, and so I think on the continent we have done well in terms of representation and the implementation of quotas, but that doesn't lead to substantive change necessarily. And the political culture is the substantive change that we need. So if women are to be in these institutions, I've operated outside, but I see value in being a feminist and being within these political institutions. Because the women's movement, the people who are from the ANC Women's League, who are in the ANC, do not have feminism in mind. They do not have the feminist agenda as their priority. I mean, they were willing to defend Jacob Zuma at his rape trial. So, and some of the positions that the League takes are very problematic. So I think that feminism cannot operate outside of these political institutions, and we cannot accept that kind of political culture.
Mine is a quick one. Can we please talk about the privilege and the capital that you people needed to get into those, to access those spaces and to be able to bear the cost of whatever comes with being a young leader? So the social, the financial, and whatever capital and privileges that have allowed you to get access to political spaces that wouldn't allow another person to be able to do that. And that facilitates you to be able to bear the cost that comes with being in those positions as a young person.
Okay. We're going to take one more question, then we're going to allow the panel
this is the third part of the one question.
Then we'll do another round. We'll do another round afterwards, don't worry.
Sure.
I've seen your hand,
I want
don't
to
worry.
know, I want to know what helped you, Nana. I know that the women's movement have been doing training of women politicians. I've been involved in it since the 80s. So women's movements have been trying to get women into power for a long time, and we've moved beyond critical mass to critical women because of this non-delivery. I would say there were never enough women, but even Rwanda, where there were, the first country in the world to have a majority of women democratically elected, the change has not been enough. So it's not just about getting in, but I want to know what will make you powerful and effective in political structures, and what has helped you get there.
Is it a quick question, just for this round?
Thank you, Zuad. It's a question. You mentioned, my name is Natasha from Chatham House. You mentioned about legislation and the importance of having legislation. But let me say a majority of African countries have fantastic laws and policies. That is not the issue. And I'm speaking specifically for Kenya. We have fantastic laws on gender-responsive governance. We're just not implementing these laws. And even if we're doing so, we are doing it partially. And there's an element of tokenism. You know, we've gotten you this far. And, you know, a lot of Kenyan politicians, female politicians, have even been branded, if they're Kenyans in this room, they know the terms, Sumbwa Tarif. You're ungovernable. You cannot be fitted into a particular box. So let's not act like, you know, politics is this neat thing that just needs legislation. No. It isn't. Politics is tough, especially at the grassroots level. Kenyan women just came from one of the most brutal elections they've ever faced. Threats of rape, death threats, actual rape. So I think we also need to, I think sometimes politics, when we speak about young politics, it's very elitist. My friend, on the ground, things are very different. Huh? Things are very different.
So I think I'm going to allow the panel to deal with the issue of privilege, of support from other women, and legislation and implementation. So perhaps you can pick the one that you feel you are most directly for you. We'll take that one. Please go ahead, Anna.
Okay.
Sure.
Well, starting this journey, I had a few things at my disposal. I had people in the constituency that growing up, I grew up in Accra, but going back and forth to my constituency a lot more, they knew me and I knew them. We already had a relationship, And usually with, as my sister from Kenya mentioned, what makes it a lot more difficult is when your people can't associate themselves with you. They need to be able to find a relationship with you. You need to be able to understand them so well to speak their language, to discuss problems, discuss possible solutions that you could help with. Lately, leadership has changed from being the one giving orders to empowering others. Now, as you empower people, they see a leader in you. So these are the few things that, to me, did help me a lot. And going forward, I know what will be so useful will be delivering more and more to my constituents. You know, as a woman and, of course, as a younger person in Parliament, I have to work twice to justify my inclusion. As against, let's say, a 50-year-old man, I have to work more than twice the 50-year-old man would work to be able to prove myself worthy of my position. I have to prove more as a youthful person, and I have to prove more as a woman. So being able to deliver more and more, I'm sure will help. And with the influx of education, so much is changing, although it's at a very, very slow pace, but so much is changing. And with or without affirmative action, we are getting there. It is slow, but we are not resting. Let's say in the previous parliament, out of 275 MPs, 29 of them were women. Well, that one was the 6th parliament. And then this time, in the 7th parliament, 37 are women, out of 275. The rate of the change is ridiculous, ridiculously slow, but at least there is a change. Thankfully, we have a president who was here last week who believes in the women agenda. He believes in giving women the opportunity. He believes in assisting women to be able to deliver on their mandate. So that alone too is some good consolation that he's ready to assist to make sure that a woman delivers and then delivers properly. Thank you.
I just want to comment on two issues. Firstly, the question or comment raised to do with privilege, and then the one about why women inclusion doesn't translate into transformation around women's issues. Firstly, on privilege, anyone sitting in this room is privileged. When privileged people don't get involved in politics, the public attitude is, oh, you're so privileged, you're so apathetic, why don't you try and do something and get involved? When they do get involved, it's, oh, you're so privileged, what are you doing there? So the question that has to be asked is, what is the adequate response to privilege? If you're privileged in the sense that you've got education, you've got access to some opportunities, do you hide that privilege under the table? Or do you use your privilege to better people's lives, to serve communities, and to try and make a difference? I suggest it's the latter, because when you've got more resources, you build a longer table, not a higher wall. And so people should not feel bad about their privilege, but they should use it to think very carefully about how they can use it as a tool to help people and to get very much in touch with the grassroots, because any politician will tell you the grassroots are queen. You really have to get onto the ground, because that's not only is that where the numbers are, but that's where the issues are, and that's where real change happens. Now, coming to the question of female inclusion, why it doesn't translate into transformation, the simple issue is this: the patriarchy recruits women. And so when you see a parliament that's full of women, don't think that necessarily it means that the voice of women's issues is going to resonate. To the contrary, it's likely not to. So I think it's very important for women, like young people, to always retain their agency and not allow themselves to be proxies for male interests. It's very important that we do that because that's the only way we can make progress on issues that affect women, whether it's marriage rights, child marriage, all the issues that we know a lot about. You have to go in there with a genuine authenticity and independence. And just coming back to the question of why didn't I join a political party, the first thing that happens when you want to join a political party is all the bigwigs start saying, can I take you for a drink? And you don't want to have to deal with that. Of course, you can navigate sexual harassment and those sort of issues, but you know, it's a waste of time to get involved with that. You want to get directly to representing people and people's issues. So that's part of the reason I've gone the route that I have. And I think it's very important that we use our privilege to benefit and improve the lives of people around us, the people we aspire to serve, and that once we get there, we become a voice for the issues that matter, whether it's young people, women's issues, and genuine change and progress. Thanks.
Yeah. Sorry, I just want to... Thanks so much, Feza. I just want to respond. I completely missed the privilege question, so I'll just deal with the legislature. But just maybe comment on it is that I'm using my context because that's the context that I know. I would have never imagined that I would speak at an Oxford because I'm a boy from Soweto. When we fought for, so 1 in 3 kids make it to varsity in South Africa, right? 1 in 3. And you're often told when you are that one who's made it into varsity, oh wow, you should feel like you're privileged to be here, right? And people didn't understand when we were pushing the Fees Must Fall campaign what we were saying, right? Because when we're saying fees must fall, people are saying, but you guys are already in the system. And therefore, because you are in the system and you are the privileged few, you should appreciate that you are here. And we said, oh, I almost said that. And
we're streaming live, please.
That is a nonsensical argument that you are saying. Because as I am here, there are 2 of my own peers who I will in future have to survive and live off. So what type of society will I be in when 2 of the 3 are not educated, they're just sitting on the side of the street, and I must just feel comfortable that I must not participate. To us, it didn't make sense. So we knew that although we were in the system, we had an obligation to fight for those who are not able to access, not because they're not smart enough, but because the material conditions don't allow in our country. The second point that I'm raising, I'm not saying that legislation is the end-all and be-all. By all means, no. I'm saying it's an important tool that must be used to deal with privilege. And if you don't use it, you would, for example, not be able to achieve some of the goals that you're able to achieve through the gender struggle, through the race struggle, and through the class struggle, right? So they're important. And I agree with your point. Because if quotas were sufficient enough and legislation were enough, we would have not dealt with a campaign, as the example that I used with Nkosazana, which was based on, I don't want to use a bad word, but the vulgarization. I wanted to use another word, but I can't use it because you're laughing. Yes. So I agree with you. Quotas are not the end-all and be-all, but they're an important tool. Legislation is an important tool because I know in my country we would have not gotten as far as we have if we had not legislated some of the things which deal with the structural imbalances. But 24 years down the line, we're then saying that we've legislated, but we haven't as yet implemented. But they're an important tool that I think we must appreciate, and we must say, how do we ensure that they move from quantitative to qualitative transformation?
So, thank you for the whole. So listen, I'm stuck between 2 hats here. The moderator of an amazingly robust and lively discussion, and then also program manager who has to keep time. So what I propose is this. If you want to go, lunch is being served outside. But if you want to continue in this conversation, you're free to stay, right? We'll only extend it for another 5 or so minutes, yes? Or 10 maybe. But the point is, if you want to go and eat lunch, please feel free to go because the session time has now ended. And with that having been said, I see no one sitting up and packing their bags. So we're going to start with Linda, Valerie, and then I know my brother here had his hand up. And then we're going to come the one next. In fact, we'll do you actually as well. So 4. So 4 quick, concise questions. And go right ahead, Linda.
firstly, I must say I'm very impressed by the panelists. Very, very impressed. But I want to just say a bit, it's a comment and also expecting a response back. There's this notion somehow as women that the men must open the door, or the men must give us a seat at the table, or that someone must do for us. For me, it takes away, and it's a question I always get asked, like, what are men doing to make more women in business? Or it's not their obligation. You know, it takes away from our power, first of all. It takes away from our own agency and our skills and our ability. And particularly with you guys, you're in a sector or a space which requires you to be calculating, strategic, and strong. So I just wanted to find out, I mean, especially for you, Fadzai, when you're operating as an independent, will you ever be in a position of real power to actually, and I'm not just talking about project by project opportunities, I'm talking about real power where you can influence policy on a large scale. And for you, Debucho, I can see your strategy in having stayed in the ANC, because the ANC is now revived under the leadership of Comrade Cyril Ramaphosa. However, you spoke the truth about how far Julius has come. And when I look at Julius, at first we undermined him. Right? I undermined him myself. But he is a political beast.
He is.
And we as women is what I'm trying to say. I'm not saying you need to follow his model. We need to be political beasts. So when you say to me, for example, you're discouraged by sexual harassment, what are we doing to be calculating? And I know people always want women to be soft and whatever, but it doesn't work that way. The real world in business, real world in politics requires you to have a level of strategy to reach the top. And it is only then, when you're at the top, you can actually implement real change. So can we talk about these uncomfortable issues? Because we always like to talk about the nice stuff. But can we just maybe, I'd love to hear from you guys.
We're just going to ask the questions. So we're just going to get all the questions and then it's free to Valerie over here at the front.
Thank you. Thank you. I know everyone's hungry, but I'll try to be quite disciplined with my question. I've got an observation and then a question. My observation in terms of the way the discussion has been going, a lot of things have come up, probably because there's a lot of women in the room, women's issues and youth issues. But we know as a continent that, I think it was a number someone mentioned, 52%, 51% of the population is female, so that's the majority. But also in terms of youth, we've got one of the youngest average ages in the whole world as a continent. So my issue is how we talk about these things as if they're on the periphery, when that's actually the main thing. So it was just an observation just about how everyone, we talk about youth issues and women's issues, but those are the issues, it needs to kind of come to the center of the conversation. But my question, coming back to that point of privilege, I observe from the panel, I mean, I can talk to the fellow Zimbabweans on the panel. One of the problems or the challenges that I have as a young person looking into getting into politics is that feeling of, actually, I can't appeal to the mass. And by that I mean, I have a privilege. I have been privately educated. I have studied abroad. What can I say to the windy on the or the person in the rural areas? I guess what I'm getting at is, how have you guys moved the conversation in a way that really does represent and brings everyone on the journey and doesn't talk to this very intellectual elite? That's a very practical question. How do you broaden that appeal? How do you do a Julius Malema in the way that he can credibly rock Parliament in his miners gumboots? So that's my question.
Thank you. Just very quickly.
My name is Moses. I must say that the three panelists are not too young to lead. You guys can really lead. I mean, on the issue of funding, okay, I've had the pleasure of also participating in elections. I ran for Member of Parliament in Ghana, lost by 200 votes. But but I mean, for me, it was experience. And I remember sitting on Thank you so much. I remember sitting on a TV interview, and I was asked this question of what I thought about women participation in our political system. And I said to them my response was this: if we really wanted to have more women in our parliaments, then we needed to think about funding, government funding for political parties. And then, when we fund political parties from government coffers, we can tell these political parties what we wanted as quota for women in this parliament. It is only when we do that that these parties would definitely be able to feature more women because they have quotas to meet, right? It is not that women are incapable. It is that they are either not encouraged or they are not given that equal play field as all of them attributed. Now, my question to you is, do you believe that, I know this is a debate in Ghana, the Honorable Member of Parliament is aware of that, it's been a long debate. Do you believe that political funding from government is one of the best ways? I just want to know, maybe to the other countries too, do you support that?
Okay. Question up front, very quickly. Where's the microphone? This is this round. We're approaching 1 o'clock.
Thank you very much. My name is Ditiro. I am a South African, currently living and working in London. I have a question for Deborah and Fatsai. So, Deborah specifically, you are, okay, firstly, I've been doing a bit of reading about our history, the ANC, and also looking at what the ANC has become now. And I think we can all agree that it has lost itself. The ANC that was then is not the ANC that is now. So it's a very dysfunctional system as it stands, and they really have ruined so much. There's so much potential of what they could have done in the past 24 years, and they're not willing, and they keep looting. I'll use all of you as a general because basically that is what is generally happening in South Africa right now. You had so much potential to do a lot, but you chose not to. And you have stolen from young people their history, because our education system doesn't teach us all these things that I've had to learn now, and I'm very angry. And so I'm very anti-ANC and very pro-EFF at the current moment. So I wanted to know, how do you think you are going to dismantle the system if we do both agree that it's quite toxic? How are you going to dismantle it from inside? Don't you think you would have been more powerful if you were in opposition like in the EFF? Because they literally run the country now. All policy decisions, if you look at them, they're influenced by the economic freedom fighters. All the decisions that the ANC are making is to weaken the economic freedom fighters, and therefore they're doing everything that they are saying they're going to do for the people. And then secondly, I wanted to ask Fatsai, as somebody who's currently in the private sector and who is interested in also going into business at a near future, but also very passionate about politics, and I've been advised that it's going to kill my career. There's partners that are very interested in my progress who have told me to tone down my political views as well on social media. So I wanted to know, how do you balance being politically involved and still keep your private sector ambitions as well? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So panelists, if you can be as concise as possible. I know we have politicians and aspiring politicians, but...
Okay, I'll start. So starting first with Linda, very interesting observations, thank you very much. I'll take a lot of it on board. Why wait for a door? Absolutely don't, because nobody opens doors for you in politics. People enjoy power because it gives them access to all sorts of things, especially in Africa, where the culture of primitive accumulation is quite real. So I absolutely believe in building a door for yourself, because then you can also decide on the design of the door, design what quality of wood you'll use, whether you'll lock it, whether you'll open it to certain people, whether you'll close certain vices out. So absolutely I believe in that. What power will you have as an independent? Now, for the Zimbabweans in the room, I see quite a few. Most of you will probably have met me at the bond notes debate. Remember that? Now, that's at a time when I had no political interest whatsoever, but the Reserve Bank governor had decided to introduce fake money, bond notes. It was unconstitutional, it was unlawful, and yet our lawmakers just sat back and said absolutely nothing. I remember, because I teach administrative and local government law as well, just writing a blog for my students so we could debate it in class. And then various papers picked up on it and people started talking and we raised a conversation, and there was a delay of about 8 months in introducing the law because we'd caused so much noise around that. What am I saying? Sometimes it's possible for you to use your informal authority and to use your voice as an independent person who picks out the technical issues around law reform to drive social change. Now, added to that is the fact that, sometimes in Parliament, the problem isn't the voting process. Lawmaking starts with sponsoring legislation, and the quality of the debate also has a strong impact on the legislation you churn out. If you don't have strong quality and all you have are numbers, legislation will never ever serve the ends of the people it's meant to serve. So being an independent voice will absolutely help you raise the level of the discourse in that way. And as to the question I'm sure is driving at, where are we going? What's the end game? We've got a very long-term view as a campaign. 2018 isn't the be-all and end-all. We've got a very long-term view, and this year, this run is a proof of concept run. We're constantly told this won't work, this won't work. We want to try it for ourselves, and once we establish what works and what doesn't, we then hope to replicate what works, in different areas with the relevant adjustments.
Fadzi, are you hinting at a presidential?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I'll just, support. Coming to my fellow friend from Zimbabwe, privilege, what do you do? Look, when I started in politics, I was absolutely that Arundel girl, private school educated. Your growth game has to be strong. You have to learn very quickly that, the grassroots, like I say, are very, very important. And so you have to shake off some of the things that you thought you couldn't do before. And that's not even a bad thing, because you step out and meet the people, talk to them. And the people, I don't like to call them the masses because that's got, a bit of a connotation, but what people want is sincerity. They're not expecting your Shona to be perfect every single time. They can see that you're a lawyer in your real life, So sometimes you're not going to get it all right. What people want to see is sincerity, and you have to be someone who's got a strong growth game. Grow, learn the game, and play it. Because if you're deeply convicted about serving the people, it will show through and people will like that. I don't know whether they'll vote for you, time will tell, but people will respond to whatever it is you're saying. On the funding thing, I think funding is a very strong drawback for young people. And what we've done as a campaign is use crowdfunding because that's our only access. As to where the quotas and financing, by the fiscus will actually work. In Zimbabwe, we've got both. We've got quotas, 50-50, legislated in the Constitution, which is the supreme law, and we've got the Political Parties Finance Act. So theoretically, it should all be working, right? You should have a ton of women in Parliament, and their campaigns should be funded. It doesn't work like that because legislation, and I say this as a legal practitioner, is a technical fix for deeper societal and cultural social problems. So if the legislation has outpaced people's attitudes, you're not going to get the change that you require. So we need to, together with legislating on these things, make sure we go to the grassroots and inform people and try and empower them around these issues and why they're important, so that the law doesn't become a lifeless museum piece that's doing its own thing while people are actually practicing something else. Finally, to Litiro. How do you preserve your corporate image? Well, I've got a fantastic business coach who makes sure that whatever I say doesn't drive down the numbers. But more importantly, again, I think there's no running away from what sort of ecosystem we've got in Zimbabwe. So if I've always said to people in commerce, people in business, who are the people who brief me as an advocate ultimately, that if the ecosystem isn't working for you, you're never going to be able to negotiate the kind of deals that you deserve and the ones that are comparable to jurisdictions that are successful. So it's in your interest to have a strong, competent corporate voice in Parliament that's pushing your issues. And with that, you'll see that oftentimes business is persecuted for speaking politically, at least in Zimbabwe. The thresholds may differ in different jurisdictions. But in Zimbabwe, if they ban cryptos as they did last week, and you try and speak out against it as business, you will be targeted. The example of the farmers, the miners, is everywhere for people to see. So corporates don't like speaking about that. It's in their interest for them to have a spokesperson who can drive, the conversation around that agenda so that you come up with a legislative framework that actually serves their interests. So that's how you model it. And also, you have to be absolutely strategic about how you communicate. I've got a communications director. Be humble about just how much help you need as a politician. Surround yourself with a network that keeps you grounded, that keeps you messaging tight. And also, you have to learn how to be polite and to tell people to get lost. I won't use Tebogo's word, but to do so respectfully and incisively. And because, at the end of the day, what do you want when you're looking for a lawyer? You want someone who can push your arguments in a strong way. So it's about building a brand that fits into that narrative. And I think that's something that you can absolutely develop over time. Thank you.
So I hate to do this, but I'm only going to give you 1 minute to respond to your respective questions, and only one of them, so we can wrap up and go for lunch, which you all decided you didn't want. But
so did you? I'm going to be direct to you. Firstly, thank you for the question, and I think it's a good critique that you're saying, but I'll humbly disagree, and I'll tell you why. There's a notion that we try to do currently in South Africa, and the EFF, which I appreciate, sometimes likes to claim easy victories and tell a bit of lies. So, for example, in the South African context, let's not pretend that our negotiation was a simple tea over the table. Our partners, in terms of Russia, had collapsed. Our people were being butchered in Buipatong. Our people were being butchered in Bizani in the massacres. So how our liberators then entered into some of the negotiations that they did, we must not pretend as if it was a walk in the park and it was a picnic. And we sometimes tend to do that in insulting those who came before us. For example, we've got one of the biggest, in the last 24 years, you may know that we've got one of the biggest social programs on the continent. We've got the amount of over 1 million houses that we've built. If you look at higher education, what we've been able to do. Now, my critique, and my critique of my own government, is that have we assimilated or have we attempted to transform the economic positions that were there? So what the EFF is saying around land was what we were saying in 2011. And my critique about the ANC is that you guys are not implementing what we're saying to you guys. You've waited for people to go out, form another organization, and tell you what we've been telling you. So if the older people, or our leaders, let me not use age, but if they had to listen more, and that's why we're agitating them, we're saying that we are not going to allow a situation where you are going to impose views onto us. But like I said to you, I'm not wary of the fact that at some point, and it goes back to the point that I was raising earlier on, I've decided to stay because I'm a firm believer that the ANC does not belong to its leadership. It was formed on particular values. And it was formed by the people. In 1912, when it was formed, it was people who came and said, this is our collective oppression, and we're using this vehicle to do that. At a point where we're no longer able to do that, one may consider and reconsider. But at this stage, I'm strongly of the belief that we're still able to achieve the things that we're able to do in the ANC. And the EFF is a necessary agitation. It's an appreciated agitation, and I don't dismiss it. In actual fact, I think it's an ally more than an opposition party. That's my personal view.
Thank you. Honorable Doko, we'll give you the last word.
Okay, thank you. Well, with my brother's question that he raised on government funding political parties and giving them quotas for women, there's a job to be done, not just a position to fill. We do want to see women in parliament, yes, but we do want to see women go through the system to get to parliament. What happens if the government funds political parties? They find us anybody just because of the agenda and then represent us in parliament. I'm not so sure that's what we want to do. Women are being fought, and that's discouraging lots of women from getting in there. Women are being maligned. Their credibility and integrity is being challenged just because they are women. And we need to be able to put away all that fight and war against women just because they are women. Until we get to the point where all those fights against the women and all those insults, all those immorality traits associated with women, I'm sure we'll get women, lots of women, coming out on their own to contest. And there's absolutely nothing like a confident woman who is so sure of what she wants to do for her people and contesting in the election. Once we fight all these maligning and all the negative attacks against women, I'm not so sure we will need a government fund and a particular quota for the political parties. And also to touch a little bit on the privileged system that the lady mentioned. Well, there's an adage in my Ghanaian dialect that says all 5 fingers are never equal. Right from birth, we all come from different backgrounds, we all reach different heights, we have different opportunities, and no matter which part of the world you are from, there's some opportunity uniquely yours. So it's up to us to use whatever quality we have to be able to influence, to empower others. Or it's up to us to sit on it and then be selfish about it. We have a choice. And I'm hoping after this session, all of you here, scholars, would not see your certificates as good enough to just pile down, but it will be an opportunity to light up some fire in your various countries.
Thank you. And on that note, we'd like to thank our amazing dynamic panelists. And I think we can all agree we're definitely not too young to lead. And I hope you've left inspired. And please enjoy your short lunch for the next half an hour. And feel free to ask questions when we're outside, when we clear the room.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much.
Thanks,
brother. That was amazing.
I hope we didn't disappoint.
Oh, no. It could have went over, but like 20 minutes was such a